I heard applause inside my dead father's lake house, and for a few seconds I just stood in the gravel driveway with his old brass key in my hand, trying to make my eyes accept what my ears already knew. The sun had dropped behind Silver Pine Lake, leaving the water dark blue and glassy, and the pine trees along the shore were moving just enough to carry the smell of wet cedar, lake mud, and fresh coffee through the open windows of a building my father had built with his own hands. I had driven out there to check the dock after 3 days of hard spring rain. That was all. I expected a quiet evening, maybe a loose board, maybe a branch across the lower steps, maybe the soft creak of the old screen door that had sounded the same since I was a kid. Instead, the gravel lot was packed with cars I did not recognize. A white sport utility vehicle sat near the porch like it had the right to be there. Through the windows, I saw rows of folding chairs, a coffee urn on my father's oak counter, paper cups beside the sink, and people nodding along while a woman at the front spoke into a small microphone. The temporary sign taped to my door said Silver Pine Shores Homeowners Association Board Meeting, and beneath it, in smaller letters, Lakeside Community Pavilion. My thumb pressed against the stamped initials on the key, G.W. Gus Whitaker, the man who had welded the dock rail, framed the porch, hung the cedar siding, and taught me that a clean weld and a clean deed both meant something only if you respected the line. That key had opened this lake house for more than 30 years. It had been in my father's pocket when he took me fishing before sunrise, in my hand the day we replaced the south steps, and in the small envelope his attorney gave me after the funeral. I walked up the porch, past the muddy footprints of strangers, and slid the brass key into the lock. It stopped halfway. Not sticky, not weather-swollen. Wrong. I tried again, slower. The key would not turn because the lock was not my lock anymore. From inside, a burst of polite laughter rolled through the room, followed by a familiar voice, bright and polished. As I was saying, our lake house has always represented the shared character of Silver Pine Shores. Marjorie Bellamy, president of the Homeowners Association, queen of matching dock lights, committee rules, and letters that started with neighborly concern before ending in threats of fines. I looked through the glass panel beside the door and saw her standing near my father's stone fireplace, cream blazer perfect, pearl earrings shining, one hand resting on the mantel where Dad used to keep a jar of old fishing lures. She was pointing at a printed agenda like she owned the room, like the cedar beams over her head had not been cut, sanded, and raised by my family. I did not kick the door. I did not pound on the glass. I did not shout over the meeting. I pulled out my phone, started recording, and slowly captured the cars, the sign, the new keypad box screwed beside my door, the changed lock, the sound of her calling my property hours, and the faces of residents sitting comfortably in a place they had been told was theirs. Then I stepped back into the cool lake air, closed my fist around my father's useless brass key, and understood this was not a misunderstanding. Someone had not borrowed my lake house. Someone had been teaching an entire neighborhood to forget it was mine. I stood on that porch long enough to hear Marjorie Bellamy move through 3 agenda items inside my lake house, and every word made the brass key feel heavier in my palm. She talked about dock lighting standards, seasonal landscaping, and the continued availability of our lakeside meeting space, while residents shuffled papers at my father's table and someone poured coffee into cups beside the sink where he used to rinse fish at dawn. My first instinct was not anger. It was disbelief, clean and cold, the kind that makes your hearing sharpen. I could hear the old ceiling fan clicking once every turn. I could hear folding chair legs scrape across the pine floor Dad had sanded himself. I could hear the lake tapping against the dock pilings below the bank, the same slow sound that filled the house every summer night of my childhood. That lake house sat on parcel 18C, a private half-acre wedge between Silver Pine Lake and the old county road, bought by my father before Silver Pine Shores had its stone entrance sign, before Marjorie had a committee, before anyone used words like shared character to reach across a property line. The Homeowners Association had a walking easement along the lower shoreline trail, nothing more. No deed interest, no lease, no maintenance agreement, no right to cross the porch, touch the locks, use the fireplace, or drink coffee under my father's roof beams. I knew that because after Dad died, I spent 2 weeks sorting his records in the back office of Whitaker Fabrication, my shop in town, where we build steel gates, dock frames, security plates, hinge guards, and commercial handrails for people who understand that access is not a suggestion. Dad had kept everything. Tax receipts in brown envelopes. Dock permits in a blue folder. Insurance papers clipped to the survey. A county parcel map with his pencil marks along the tree line. Even photographs of the original foundation forms, the porch posts, and the steel brackets he asked me to weld when I was 21. My name was on the current deed. My insurance covered the structure. My keys opened the doors until someone decided they should not. I stepped off the porch and walked the perimeter slowly, still recording. The new keypad box was mounted beside the main door with silver screws too clean to be old. The side entrance had a fresh latch plate. The back door near the dock had a small homeowners association access sticker tucked under the light fixture. That detail almost made me laugh, because it was so perfectly Marjorie. She never took something all at once if she could relabel it first. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was my daughter Nora calling back. She was 28, sharp as a tack, and had spent enough Saturdays at the Lakehouse to know every loose board on the porch. Dad, why did you text me a picture of an association meeting sign on Grandpa's door? I kept my voice low. Because they changed the locks. Silence. Then the sound of her chair moving. Do not go inside. I am not. Do not touch the keypad. Already filming it. Good. Send me everything. I will pull the deed file from the shop. Cloud and check the trail camera. I looked toward the pine tree above the driveway where a small green camera faced the porch. Dad had installed the first one after raccoons got into the bait cooler. I upgraded it last year. If someone had changed my locks, that camera had watched them do it. Inside, Marjorie's microphone crackled again. We want residents to feel this space belongs to the community. I looked down at the key marked GW. Useless only because someone had replaced the truth with hardware, and said quietly into my recording, "No, Marjorie. You wanted them to feel that before anyone asked who owned it." The trail camera saved everything in sharp gray-green evening light, and Nora found the clip before the meeting inside my Lakehouse reached old business. She sent it to my phone with no message at first, just the file, because she knew I would understand faster by seeing it than by reading her anger. I stood beside the pine tree above the gravel lot, lake wind pressing cold through my jacket, and watched a maintenance truck roll into my driveway 2 afternoons earlier. The name on the door was Preston Property Services. A man I recognized from Silver Pine Shore's flowerbed work climbed out with a drill case, a cardboard box, and a folded work order. Lloyd Preston. He was not sneaking. That was almost worse. He walked up my porch like a man doing a job someone had convinced him was legitimate, removed the lock my father had installed, mounted the keypad box, tested the new latch, and stuck a small association access label near the back door. A white sport utility vehicle appeared 10 minutes later. Marjorie stepped out, checked the keypad, typed something into her phone, and looked around the property with the satisfied patience of someone watching a sign go up on land she intended to claim one routine at a time. Nora called again as soon as the clip ended. "Dad, there is a second file." She stood there while he changed it. I saw. I pulled the deed. I pulled the survey. I pulled the dock permit. I also found last month's Silver Pine Shores newsletter. They listed the Lakehouse as a historic lakeside meeting space. I closed my eyes for half a second, and the sounds around me sharpened again. Microphone static through the window, chair legs scraping, coffee dripping, lake water touching the dock below. Send everything to Diane Mercer. Diane was my property attorney, the kind of lawyer who could make a sentence sound polite and final at the same time. Already did, Nora said. She says do not enter while they are inside. Do not remove hardware yet. Preserve the scene, call the sheriff's office non-emergency line, and keep recording. That was exactly what I needed to hear, because I am a welder by trade, and every part of me knew how easy it would have been to fix the physical problem. I had a service truck less than a mile away at Whitaker Fabrication with grinders, steel plate, hinge guards, tamper-proof hasps, and a portable welding unit that could make that keypad irrelevant before the coffee inside cooled. But easy is not the same as legal, and legal was the only way this ended with my father's Lakehouse back in my family's hands instead of tangled in accusations. My father used to say a weld only holds if the metal is clean before the arc starts. Property is the same way. You clean the record first. You remove every excuse. You let the truth sit flat before you lock anything down. So I filmed the changed lock from 3 angles. I filmed the keypad without touching it. I filmed the association meeting sign. I filmed the cars in the gravel lot. careful not to focus on license plates longer than necessary. I filmed the walking easement sign down by the shoreline trail, because that was the only right Silver Pine Shores had ever been granted near this parcel. Then I called the sheriff's office and gave my name, the address, the parcel number, and the calmest version of the sentence that had been burning in my throat for 20 minutes. There are people holding a private association meeting inside my lake house, and the locks appear to have been changed without my permission. The dispatcher asked if anyone was in immediate danger. No, I said, and I intend to keep it that way. I need a deputy to document trespass and verify ownership. Through the window, Marjorie lifted her paper agenda and smiled at the room. I looked at my father's brass key in my palm and finally understood her method. She had not taken the lake house with one loud act. She had done it with newsletters, labels, meeting calendars, routine coffee, and a new lock, hoping that if enough people sat under my father's beams, ownership would start sounding rude. Deputy Mark Hollis arrived with his headlights low and his window halfway down, moving slowly across the gravel lot like he already understood that the most dangerous thing on that property was not a person, but a story being told wrong. He parked beside my truck, stepped out with a small notebook, and let his eyes move from the packed cars to the temporary meeting sign, then to the new keypad box beside my father's door. "You Caleb Whitaker?" he asked. "Yes, sir." I handed him my driver's license, then the printed parcel map Nora had sent to the portable printer in my truck, because Diane had told me to make the first 5 minutes boring and complete. Boring evidence is hard to argue with. "This is parcel 18C, I said. "Private property. My name is on the deed. Silver Pine Shores has a shoreline walking easement below the bank, but no right to enter the structure. My key no longer works, and my trail camera shows a contractor changing the lock 2 days ago." Deputy Hollis looked at the brass key in my palm, then at the door where Marjorie's sign fluttered under the porch light. "Anyone threatened?" "No. I have not gone in. I have not touched the keypad. I called because I want it documented and peaceful." He nodded once, and that nod mattered. It put the whole night back on rails. We walked up the porch together. Through the window, Marjorie was still speaking, one hand lifted in that calm boardroom rhythm she used when she wanted a room to mistake confidence for authority. Deputy Hollis knocked. The sound landed heavy inside the lake house. The microphone crackled, chairs shifted, and Marjorie opened the door with a smile that lasted only until she saw my face beside the deputy's shoulder. "Good evening, officer," she said. "We are in the middle of an association meeting." Deputy Hollis kept his tone even. "I understand. I need to confirm permission to use this property." Marjorie glanced at me like I was an interruption instead of the owner. "This is a community lake facility. The association has maintained access for resident use." I felt the brass key bite into my fingers, but I said nothing. Deputy Hollis asked the question Diane had predicted. "Do you have a deed, lease, written permission from the owner, or any document granting the association access to the building?" The room went so quiet I could hear the coffee urn clicking on the counter. A few residents turned in their folding chairs and looked at the cedar beams, the stone fireplace, the family photos still on the far shelf, the old fishing net my father had hung beside the back door. Marjorie lifted her folder. "The lake house is part of the community lake zone." "That is not what I asked." Her smile thinned. "The board approved use of this space." "The board cannot approve use of property it does not own without permission." A woman near the back whispered, "Wait, this is not ours." That was the first crack. Then another resident looked at the printed agenda in his lap and folded it closed. Marjorie turned toward the room. "Everyone, please remain calm. This is a technical misunderstanding." Deputy Hollis looked at me. "Mr. Whitaker, do you want them to leave the property tonight while ownership is reviewed?" I looked past him into the room where strangers sat under the roof my father had built, where Marjorie had placed coffee cups beside his sink and called memory an amenity. "Yes," I said, peacefully. "They can take their papers and leave. I do not want anyone blocked, rushed, or embarrassed. I just want my house cleared." Deputy Hollis stepped inside and repeated it in a voice that did not need volume. People stood slowly, confused more than angry, carrying purses, folders, jackets, and paper cups toward the porch. Marjorie stayed near the fireplace, folder clutched tight. Watching her meeting walk out through a door she had no right to relabel. When the last resident crossed the threshold, Deputy Hollis looked back at her and said, "Ma'am, You need to exit as well. For the first time that night, Marjorie Bellamy had to ask permission from the truth. After Marjorie stepped onto the porch, the Lakehouse seemed to exhale for the first time all night. People moved past me in a slow, embarrassed line, clutching folders, jackets, coffee cups, and plates of store-bought cookies like they had just discovered they had been guests at a table nobody had permission to set. Most would not meet my eyes. One woman, older, with silver hair tucked under a rain jacket hood, stopped beside me and whispered, "They told us this was included in our community fees." I did not answer because Deputy Hollis was still documenting the scene and because every word now mattered. Marjorie stood near the steps, her cream blazer bright under the porch light, watching residents walk to their cars across my gravel lot. She looked less like a president and more like someone waiting for the room she had controlled to put itself back together. It did not. When the last car door closed, Deputy Hollis turned to me. "Do you want to enter and inspect for missing or damaged property?" I looked down at the brass key in my hand, the one that no longer worked, and felt a strange little grief pass through me. "Yes, sir. With you present." He tested the door through the keypad, while Marjorie gave him the code with visible reluctance. The lock clicked open, and that sound bothered me more than if it had stayed shut. My father's door had answered to a number chosen by people who never built it, never paid taxes on it, never sat with him on the porch after a long day when the lake turned copper at sunset. Inside, the Lakehouse smelled like coffee, paper, perfume, and wet shoes instead of cedar and old fishing tackle. Folding chairs scratched half-moons into the pine floor. A stack of association agendas sat on the stone fireplace hearth. Someone had moved Dad's jar of old lures to make room for a wireless speaker. On the counter, beside the sink, was a printed sign that said, "Please keep our pavilion clean." Our pavilion. I photographed it before I touched anything. Deputy Hollis photographed the room too. Marjorie hovered at the threshold. "Those items were temporary," she said. "We were of a shared lake resource." Deputy Hollis did not look up from his notebook. "Ma'am, please remain outside unless invited by the property owner." The words landed softly, but they put the room back in my hands. I walked to the mantel and picked up the photo frame they had turned backward. It was Dad and me on the dock 25 years earlier, both of us sunburned, both holding striped base and grinning like fools. Behind us in the picture was the same Lakehouse, newer then, the cedars still honey-colored, the porch rail still unfinished because Dad said a place did not become home until your hands had more work to do. Nora arrived 10 minutes later with Diane Mercer on speakerphone. She came in quietly, saw the chairs, the agendas, the coffee urn, the moved photograph, and stopped cold. "Grandpa would have hated this," she said. I nodded. "That is why we are going to do it clean." We documented every room. The back door had a fresh latch plate. The side entrance had new screws. A small gray access box had been mounted near the storage closet, and inside were 3 labeled keycards: board, maintenance, events. Diane's voice through the phone became sharper when Nora read the labels. "Photograph the keycards in place. Do not remove them yet. I am sending a written trespass notice and preservation demand tonight." Then Nora opened her tablet and pulled up the trail camera folder again. "There is more," she said. Lloyd Preston came back the same day with a second box. The clip showed the contractor carrying the keycard access box and a bundle of small signs toward the porch. Then Marjorie appeared beside him, pointing to the side door, the back entrance, and the mantel through the window like she was arranging furniture in a house she had already decided was hers. I looked around the room, at the coffee stain on Dad's counter, at the chairs on his floor, at the words "Our Pavilion" printed in black ink where his tackle box used to sit, and finally understood the size of it. She had not just changed a lock. She had changed the story people were repeating when they walked through the door. Folding chairs were stacked against the wall. The coffee urn was unplugged. The paper agendas were sealed in a clear evidence bag Deputy Hollis left with me, and the association signs still leaned against the counter like small cardboard claims waiting to be challenged. Nora and I worked under the warm light above my father's oak table, photographing every screw hole, every new latch plate, every label on the keycard box, every place where someone had moved something old to make room for something official. Diane Mercer's preservation notice went out at 12:17 in the morning to Marjorie Bellamy, the Silver Pine Shores Board, the management company, and Lloyd Preston. It demanded that they preserve all emails, invoices, work orders, newsletters, meeting calendars, access codes, fee records, maintenance notes, and communications related to my Lakehouse, parcel 18C, the walking easement, and any use of the words pavilion, amenity, community lake space, or board-approved access. Diane had a gift for writing sentences that sounded calm until you realized they had locked every exit from an excuse. At 6:40 the next morning, Lloyd Preston called me directly. His voice was rough with regret before he even introduced himself. "Mr. Whitaker, I was told the association had authority to upgrade access hardware." I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee gone cold in my hand, watching fog lift off Silverpine Lake in pale strips. "Who told you that?" "Marjorie Bellamy." Work order came through the management office. It called the building the Lake Pavilion. "Did you see a deed, lease, or written owner permission?" The line went quiet except for the faint sound of traffic wherever he was. "No, sir." I asked if the owner had signed off, and she said the board handled community facilities. By 8, Lloyd had emailed Diane the work order, the invoice, and the message thread. The subject line read Board-Approved Access Improvement. The building description said Historic Lakeside Pavilion. Then came the message from Marjorie that changed the whole case from arrogance to planning. Owner rarely uses the structure. Once meetings become routine, access will be assumed. As part of lake programming. Nora read it once, then set the tablet down very carefully, like the words might stain her fingers. "She knew," she said. "She knew it was yours." I looked through the window at the mantel where Dad's photo was facing the room again. "Yes," I said. "She just thought routine could bury ownership." Diane called 20 minutes later. "There is more. I received a budget packet from a resident named Evelyn Carter. Silverpine Shores charged a Lakehouse programming and access maintenance fee this year." I walked outside because I suddenly needed air. The lake was calm, ducks cutting little lines across the surface, the dock still wet from last night's rain. Somewhere across the water, a lawn mower started. Ordinary morning sounds kept happening like my family property had not been placed inside someone else's budget. Diane continued. "Residents were billed for access to a building the association does not own. That creates a different level of exposure." At 9:30, Evelyn Carter arrived at the end of the gravel drive with a folder clutched to her chest and embarrassment written across her face. She was the same woman who had whispered to me on the porch. "I am sorry," she said before I could greet her. "We were told this was included. Marjorie said your father wanted the Lakehouse to benefit the neighborhood." That sentence hit harder than the changed lock. My father had shared fish, tools, coffee, and advice. He had never shared his deed with a board. Evelyn handed me newsletters going back 8 months. There it was in glossy color, a photograph of my Lakehouse at sunset, captioned as the historic lakeside meeting space. Another page listed committee nights, coffee socials, and lake programming. At the bottom was a small note that said access supported by community maintenance fees. I carried those pages inside and laid them beside the brass key, the trail camera clip, the work order, the key cards, and Marjorie's message. The pattern was finally complete. She had changed the language, then the calendar, then the lock, then the money. My father taught me that steel only becomes strong when heat exposes what it is made of. By noon, Marjorie's story was under enough heat to show every weak seam. That afternoon, Silverpine Shores tried to turn the whole thing into a clerical misunderstanding, which is what powerful people call it when the paperwork finally starts pointing at them. The first email came from the management company at 2:14, saying there may have been confusion regarding historical usage of the lakeside facility and requesting temporary access to retrieve association materials. Diane Mercer forwarded it to me with 3 words, "Do not agree." Then she sent her response, polite enough to frame and sharp enough to leave marks. Access would be arranged only by appointment, with me present, with Deputy Hollis notified, with no claim of ownership or permission implied, and with every item removed photographed before leaving the building. Marjorie answered 7 minutes later. She wrote that the association had acted in good faith, that residents had relied on long-standing community understanding, and that my sudden objection was creating unnecessary disruption. Nora read the sentence out loud from the oak table and gave a laugh with no humor in it. "Sudden objection? They changed the lock on your father's house." I was outside by then, walking the porch line with a tape measure and a notepad, marking every place where the association hardware had touched wood. The keypad box, the new latch, the access sticker, the gray card reader near the storage closet, the back door strike plate. Every screw hole mattered because every hole was proof that someone had treated permission like a detail they could add later. My welding truck sat at the edge of the gravel drive, loaded with steel security plates, hinge guards, replacement hardware, and tamper-proof hasps from my shop. I had everything I needed to make that lake house secure before sunset, and still I did nothing. Not yet. My father had taught me that patience is part of craftsmanship. You do not strike an arc until the metal is clean, the ground is set, and the line is true. At 4, Marjorie arrived with Lloyd Preston, 2 board members, and a man from the management company holding a clipboard. She stepped out of her white sport utility vehicle dressed like she was arriving for an inspection she still controlled. "Caleb," she said, using my first name like we were neighbors resolving a fence dispute. "We are here to collect association property and avoid further escalation." Diane stood beside me on speakerphone, Nora recording from the porch, and Deputy Hollis's patrol vehicle visible at the bottom of the drive because he had agreed to document the handoff. "You may remove loose association materials," I said. "You may not touch the locks, the walls, the doors, or anything attached to the structure." Marjorie looked toward my welding truck. "And what exactly do you intend to do with that?" I looked at the keypad she had installed beside my father's door. "Restore control of my property after the building is clear and documented." Lloyd Preston would not meet Marjorie's eyes. He walked inside with Deputy Hollis behind him and pointed out every item he had installed under her work order. "Keypad, side latch, back strike plate, card box, 3 access cards, 2 signs," he said quietly. The management company man wrote faster with every word. When Marjorie reached for the folder of Lakehouse agendas stacked on the counter, Diane's voice came through the phone. "Leave 1 copy of every document for evidence. Remove duplicates only." Marjorie froze, then lowered her hand as if the paper had become too hot. Nora photographed the coffee sign, the event calendar, the key cards, and the little printed label that said board access. Evelyn Carter arrived halfway through with 2 more residents, each holding fee statements. They stayed near the gravel, quiet and watchful. They were not angry at me. That was new. They were looking at Marjorie the way people look at a locked gate after realizing the map was wrong. When the last box of association materials was carried outside, Deputy Hollis checked each room, then looked at me. "The structure is clear," Diane said. "Caleb, you may secure your property now. Keep the video running." The sun was dropping behind Silver Pine Lake again, turning the water copper, the same color it used to turn when Dad and I packed up tools after a long repair. I pulled on my work gloves, lifted the first steel plate from the truck, and carried it toward the door Marjorie had tried to rename. She stood at the edge of the porch, folder pressed flat against her side, finally understanding that the thing she called access had always depended on me not showing up with proof. The first steel plate made a clean, heavy sound when I set it against the doorframe, and every person in the gravel lot seemed to hear more than metal touching wood. They heard the end of a routine. They heard the moment my father's lake house stopped being a place they could rename by calendar entry. I checked the edge, marked the screw points with a pencil, and kept my movements slow enough for Nora's camera, Deputy Hollis's body camera, and Marjorie's own witnesses to capture every step. The building was empty. The rooms had been checked. The association materials had been removed or documented. Diane Mercer was still on speakerphone, listening from her office, reminding everyone without raising her voice that securing private property after unauthorized access is not retaliation, it is restoration. Lloyd Preston stood beside his truck with his cap in both hands, watching me cover the holes he had drilled under Marjorie's order. He looked miserable, but he had done the one thing that mattered. He told the truth before the story hardened around the lie. I removed the keypad box first. The screws came out bright and clean, and when the plastic housing pulled free, it left a pale rectangle on the cedar where my father's stain had never seen sunlight. That mark bothered me more than the hardware. It was proof that even a short trespass leaves a shadow. Nora photographed it, then the loose wires, then the empty screw holes. I capped everything, labeled the removed parts, and placed the keypad into an evidence bag. Marjorie stepped forward once. "This is excessive," she said. Deputy Hollis looked at the cleared doorway, then at the documents in Diane's folder on the porch table. Ma'am, please stay back while the owner secures the structure. Owner, not resident, not neighbor, not community participant. Owner. The words settled over the porch like a new lock clicking into place. I installed the replacement lock set first, then the hinge guards, then the tamper-resistant hasps on the storage entrance and back door where the association had mounted its access stickers. I did not seal a human being inside. I did not block anyone from leaving because no one was in there. I secured empty doors on my own building with a deputy present, my attorney listening, my daughter recording, and the lake turning copper behind us. When I fired the portable welding unit for the hinge guard brackets, the arc flashed blue-white against the dusk, and sparks fell harmlessly onto the gravel blanket I had laid below the threshold. The sound was familiar, steady, almost comforting. A bright hiss, a clean bead, the smell of hot steel and lake air. My father had taught me to weld on a scrap dock bracket behind that very house. He said the trick was not forcing the metal to obey. It was preparing the joint so the bond had no excuse to fail. That night, every bead felt like a sentence in a language Marjorie could not edit. This door was private. This access was revoked. This structure was not a pavilion. Evelyn Carter stood near the driveway with her fee statement folded in one hand, watching quietly. Several residents had stayed too, not for drama, but because they had paid for a story that was falling apart in front of them. One man asked the management company representative, "Why were we billed for this if the association did not own it?" The representative did not answer. Marjorie stared at the sparks like they were personally insulting her. When I finished, I brushed the final bead, checked the lock, and placed a temporary legal notice on the front door, private property. No association access. Written owner permission required. Then I took out my father's brass key and held it up beside the new lock. It no longer fit, and for a second that hurt. But then I realized the key had already done its job. It had proved the lock had been changed. It had carried my father into the record. It had reminded me not to solve a stolen story with a rushed mistake. I slipped it back into my pocket and looked at Marjorie across the porch. "You can call it a misunderstanding," I said, "but you cannot call it yours anymore." The clubhouse meeting happened 3 nights later, and this time nobody called it a gathering at the Lakehouse because the word had finally become too heavy to misuse. Silver Pine Shores held it in the actual clubhouse, a beige room beside the pool with fluorescent lights, folding tables, a humming soda machine, and bulletin boards covered in notices about lawn care and boat trailer parking. I walked in with Nora on one side and Diane Mercer on the other, carrying a flat document case and the old brass key in my jacket pocket. Marjorie sat at the board table in a navy dress and pearl earrings, her face smooth, her folder closed, the same way it had been on my porch when the steel plates went up. But the room did not feel like hers anymore. Residents were packed wall to wall, many holding copies of the Lakehouse programming fee line from their budget statements. Evelyn Carter sat in the front row with a yellow highlighter across the charge she had paid for access to my family's property. Diane set up her laptop and began with the deed, not emotion. Parcel 18C, Caleb Whitaker, owner of record. No transfer to Silver Pine Shores. No lease. No access agreement. No building easement. Then came the survey, the tax receipt, the dock permit, the insurance policy, and the old county walking easement showing the trail below the bank, not the porch, not the doors, not the fireplace, not the oak table where my father once taught me to clean fish and balance invoices. Marjorie leaned toward her microphone. The association relied on historical community use. Diane clicked once, and the trail camera footage appeared on the wall. Lloyd Preston removing my lock. Marjorie testing the keypad. The access label being placed on the back door. The room shifted as if everyone had inhaled at the same time and forgotten to let it out. Diane's voice stayed calm. Historical use does not explain changing locks without owner permission. Then she showed the newsletter. Historic Lakeside Meeting Space. Lakeside Community Pavilion. Coffee socials. Committee nights. Access supported by community maintenance fees. 1. Resident turned to another and whispered, "We paid for that." Marjorie tried again. Residents understood the lake area as a shared amenity. Diane clicked to Marjorie's email to Lloyd. Owner rarely uses the structure. Once meetings become routine, access will be assumed as part of lake programming. That sentence broke the room open without anyone raising their voice. A board member named Frank Mallory took off his glasses and set them on the table. Marjorie, did you know the association did not own the building when you authorized the lock change? Marjorie stared at the projected email as if waiting for the words to rearrange themselves. I believed continued use would clarify the community interest. Diane looked at the residents. That is not a property right. That is an admission. Evelyn Carter stood slowly, fee statement in hand. You told us his father wanted the neighborhood to use it. My throat tightened at that, but I stayed still. Marjorie folded her hands. Gus Whitaker was always generous with the community. I took the brass key from my pocket and placed it on the table in front of me. It made a small sound, barely more than a tap, but people turned toward it like it was louder than a gavel. My father shared coffee, I said. He shared bait. He shared tools. He shared advice with anybody who came to him honestly. He did not share ownership, and he did not leave his lake house to a committee that changed the locks after he was gone. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Deputy Hollis, standing quietly near the back wall, confirmed the building had been cleared peacefully, documented, and secured by me as the property owner after unauthorized access was established. Lloyd Preston, pale and uncomfortable, stood next. I installed the hardware because I was told the board had authority. I was not shown owner permission. The management company representative kept writing notes without looking up. Diane closed with the demands. Refund every Lakehouse-related fee. Pay for lock removal, repair, security restoration, legal fees, documentation costs, and any damage to the property. Issue a written correction to all residents. Remove the Lakehouse from every map and calendar. Adopt an access policy requiring recorded ownership or written permission, and preserve all board communications for review. Marjorie sat under the bright clubhouse lights, surrounded by residents who had finally realized the amenity they were sold had a living owner, a dead builder, a deed, a key, and a daughter and son who remembered exactly where the line was. The settlement came 8 days after the clubhouse meeting, and it arrived the same way the truth had arrived all along, not with shouting, but with documents. Silver Pine Shores agreed to refund every Lakehouse programming and access maintenance fee charged to residents, pay for removal of unauthorized hardware, repair every screw hole and latch mark, cover my legal fees, reimburse documentation costs, and send a written correction to every homeowner stating that Parcel 18C and the Lakehouse on it were private property owned by the Whitaker family, not an amenity, not a pavilion, not a shared facility, and never part of the association's common property. The management company removed every photo of the Lakehouse from the website, the brochure, the calendar, and the map by Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Marjorie Bellamy was no longer president. The board called it a resignation for the good of the community, which was the sort of phrase people use when they do not want to say removal out loud. I did not celebrate. I drove to the Lakehouse with Nora at sunset, the same hour when I had first heard strangers applauding inside my father's walls, and we walked the porch slowly while the lake turned copper beyond the dock. The air smelled right again: cedar, water, pine needles, cold metal from the rail. No coffee urn, no agendas, no association signs leaning against the counter. Inside, the oak table was bare except for Dad's old photo frame and the brass key marked GW. The new lock set shone clean on the front door, and the old key did not fit it anymore, but I had stopped seeing that as a loss. That key had opened 30 years of memory, then opened the case by proving someone had changed the truth. I mounted it inside a small shadow box beside the door with a label Nora. Wrote by hand, Gus Whitaker's Lake Key. Original family access. Below it, I installed the brass nameplate Dad had kept in a drawer for years and never bothered to mount because he said everybody who mattered already knew whose place it was. Whitaker Lakehouse. Private property. I ran my fingers over the letters after the screws were tight. At the side entrance, the steel plates and hinge guards blended neatly with the cedar trim, not ugly, not angry, just firm. My welds were clean, the beads even, the edges brushed smooth. They did not trap anyone. They did not threaten anyone. They simply told the next person with a committee title and a borrowed story that access ended at the line. Evelyn Carter stopped by later with a small envelope and an apology she had already given twice. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She had been sold a lie in glossy ink, just like the rest of them. She smiled sadly and said the new board had adopted a rule requiring recorded ownership or written permission before any association space could be listed, rented, advertised, maintained, or built. That mattered more than Marjorie losing her chair. A removed president is one consequence. A corrected system is justice. After Evelyn left, Nora and I sat on the porch steps where Dad used to sharpen fishing hooks with a pocket file. The dock creaked below us. A bass rolled near the reeds. Across the water, Silver Pine Shore's porch lights blinked on one by one, ordinary and distant. My lake house stayed quiet behind us, not empty, just finally itself again. I took the old brass key from my pocket one last time before hanging it in the shadow box, and I thought about what Dad would have said if he had seen the whole thing. Probably something simple. Probably something about how a clean weld holds, because both sides were prepared honestly before the heat came. Marjorie tried to make routine look like ownership. She tried to make a calendar replace a deed, a fee replace permission, a keypad replace a key, and a crowd replace a family. But property records do not get tired. Cameras do not care who sounds confident. Steel remembers every hole drilled into it. And when the last false sign came down, the only thing left standing was the line my father built on, the line I proved, and the door that finally opened only for the people it belonged to.